Nice crowd for this.
Well, as I said at the beginning, before the film, this is it's considered an unusual film for Turner. Although especially seen after it's restored, there are so many things that are characteristic of the rest of his work.
Yeah, I mean, what's interesting to me about this film is that it's kind of a hinge film. It started out based on actually on a novel that was serialized in 6 weekly editions of the Saturday Evening Post, and was written by a man named Ernest Haycox, whose claim to fame is that he wrote the story that became Stagecoach, and Stagecoach was the most successful Western of the 30s, and they came out of the war, everybody wanting to make Stagecoach in color. This film was originally meant for John Wayne, believe it or not. It would have been a very different film with John Wayne in the lead, because John Wayne brings a character to the screen, and Dana Andrews is at the opposite end of the spectrum. He's really, as an actor, he's like a cipher. He doesn't act at all. And Hollywood was trying to pump out these kind of big budget, big screen Westerns. I don't know how many of you have seen Duel in the Sun with Gregory Peck, which came out the same year. The two films were pitched to the same demographic, but they couldn't be more different, because Duel with the Sun is extremely expressionistic, almost hysterical. And this film is so subtle that the characters are subordinate really to the landscape. I mean, as you said, it's a little bit different from his other movies. He's mostly known for film noir like Out of the Past with Robert Mitchum, one of the top film noir, and then all these creepy psychological horror films. I Walked with a Zombie, Night of the Demon, Cat People. These are all very suggestive, not gory or explicit, which is what makes them powerful. And that's the same thing about this movie. This movie, if you read the novel, the serialized novel, it's much more violent and gory in its description than the movie is in its evocation of the violence. Everything is kind of left unshown, unspoken. This was the biggest budget film that Turner ever worked on. He even had a second unit who shot the house raising scene, which is a familiar trope in Westerns. I think in My Darling Clementine, there's a great similar scene where they all come together to build the house, and the second unit filmed the Indian attack. I really think of this movie as almost a hinge movie. It's a classical Western that wants to be a film noir. I especially like the stuff between Brian Donlevy and the consumptive guy's wife when he's gambling and getting himself in debt. And you have a situation where Brian Donlevy is lusting after this woman, even though he's engaged to Susan Hayward, who's the star of the movie. And this woman looks like Morticia Adams, but that seems to be the attraction. And you can see traces in this movie of what would be more characteristic of Westerns in the 50s, Cold War Westerns or noir Westerns, like The Gunfighter with Gregory Peck, or any of the movies that James Stewart made with Anthony Mann, or any of the movies that Randolph Scott made with Bud Boetticher. I think that, Turner knew where he wanted to take the story, and he was obviously enchanted by the setting. This made me think of another great European director who made a Western where, John Wayne thought he owned an image of the West with Monument Valley, and then he came along with this, which is a very different vision of the West. And I'm thinking of Andre de Toth, Day of the Outlaw, which was shot in the snowy mountains of Wyoming. And so this is a movie where the characters are almost subordinate to the landscape. But this movie came out right after the war, and the producers were trying to figure out how to promote it. And they thought of this as much more of a rah-rah piece of Americana than it actually turned out to be. I think I read somewhere that they wanted to run a competition to identify 6 veterans in 6 American cities and give them vacant lots on which they could build to demonstrate that can-do frontier spirit. The producers thought the coolest thing about the movie was the house raising. And, they said, we shouldn't complain about the post-war housing crisis because look at what they had to do in the frontier. So, but I like movies that are transitional almost in spite of themselves. But he made 3 other Westerns, but this is the one that he's most recognized for. So,
yeah. And I think it's, in fact, that the house raising thing is a classic trope, but the thing that comes across is not this idyllic team spirit of the frontier. Is the opposite, is the ruthlessness and the, summary justice and no trial. So that's not idyllic at all, and it's a stark contrast with this beautiful landscape.
And they're not very nice to the Indians. They give them a basket of food and blow them off. I mean, and Ward Bond, who is normally the kind of the affable second banana to John Wayne, is really an evil. It's kind of like Walter Brennan in My Darling Clementine. He's playing completely against type. So, do we have any questions or comments? I believe it was moderately successful. It wasn't nearly as successful as Day in the Sun.
Does the restoration enhance it from what it was originally? Because it's just so beautifully colored.
I think if you saw it in 1946, it would look better than it looks now. But if you took any 35 millimeter print, even a newly struck one, it wouldn't look as good as this. So.
It was hard to watch in any decent. I have memories of VHS. I think on this, and on black and white television. So nothing remotely as beautiful. And I think they went to great length to work on the technical, the look of the Technicolor, and that's why it's so incredible. And
I mean, Tourneur was so in love with the landscape that Susan Hayward wrote to Walter Wanger, the producer, and complained that she wasn't getting enough close-ups, that she wasn't getting any close-ups because he was too busy shooting the landscape.
There's plenty of close-ups. They're beautiful.
But because the producer leaned on him afterwards to put them in.
Yeah, there is correspondence. I think Chris Fujiwara wrote a great book on. There's a film critic wrote a great book on Tourneur, and he reports of correspondence between the studio basically saying you have to add the close-ups because we have movie stars here, and and we don't see them, and he kind of said no, and then he inserted a couple of them. So there was a struggle for a more traditional type of movie star treatment.
I mean, if you think about this compared to, My Darling Clementine or some of the other Westerns of the late 30s where there's good guys and bad guys. And here, Logan is kind of this avatar of capitalism that, he's off to San Francisco for another line of credit after he goes under for the 3rd or 4th time. And he's this kind of restless cipher. We don't really know. I mean, he clearly, we don't really understand why he's being so nice to Brian Donlevy, another cipher of an actor, a very lo-fi, naturalistic actor, especially since we know he's interested in his fiancée. But he doesn't really, he's kind of a good guy, but he's got some issues. They all have issues, right?
Who was the actor that played the musician and the singer and the kind of
Hoagie Carmichael. Hoagie Carmichael. He's been in a lot of. What's the Bogart and Bacall movie that he's in? To Have and Have Not. Right. Yeah.
Thank you.
It's Oregon. Oregon, yeah.
You mentioned you read the novel.
I brought the Saturday Evening Post with me if anybody wants to see what it looked like in a magazine.
What changes did you see? How close did it follow?
Well, the novel is in some ways, it follows it relatively closely, but the novel is more overtly violent, and as a novel is less well written than this is well filmed. And things like the wife of the gambler, it's spooky in the movie in ways that it's not. It's almost like she's quasi-human. There are things that Turner does to make the ordinary feel a little creepy. The novel is a straight-ahead Western Zane Grey kind of thing, so he definitely noirs it up.
You can see the use of light, in the interiors, the relationship with the outside, the forest, the shadows, and the forest. Any other?
I love the pace of the movie. I'm sorry. I'm not sure why, but I really like the pace of the movie. It didn't seem to have any lulls per se, except for when they're traveling through the countryside. But all the interactions between the characters, the actors, it seemed to just flow extremely well. I don't know what I even mean by that, but it just had a really nice feel.
No, I mean the movie starts off strong with that great scene in the mud, and it kind of sets up the rest of the movie very nicely. But you're just sitting there looking at that and thinking about what a sophisticated set it is, and how muddy it is, and the way the guy steps in the mud, and I mean it sets it up beautifully. It's a stately Western. It's not ponderous, but it's definitely stately.
Do you want to show us the Saturday evening?
Oh yes, let me get those. Hold on. This is some real Americana right here.
Oh my God. There you go. What year?
45. The war was still going on when this came out. And it came out in, it's interesting the extent to which Dana Andrews is identified with Tourneur, because in this French book about him, they put him on the cover, not in his cowboy outfit, but in his noir fedora. A lot of these great movies of the 30s were serialized in the weekly magazines, like The Postman Always Rings Twice came out as a serial in magazines before they even published the novel. Of course, people don't read novels anymore, and they don't read magazines anymore. So
Would this have been a movie that had a location portion, and was some of it done in Hollywood?
I think almost all of it was done in Oregon. I don't see anything in there that I think it would have been cheaper to build the whole town and just film it up there. I don't recall reading anything about any shots in Los Angeles. Would have been expensive.
How long did they take to shoot it?
I have no idea. It was it was the most expensive movie Turner ever made, because he was used to these kind of low budget psychological thrillers.
Anyone else?
You said it was most inexpensive. What was the cost? Can you say?
Oh,
2 million?
no, 2 million would be a lot. What was the budget of Giant?
Giant was supposed to be 2.5 million, and he went over to 5 and some. So this
Right.
this must be a friend.
Like between $1 million and 2 million, maybe something like that.
I'm sorry, did you say how long it took to make?
No, I don't know that.
There's one thing I read that it was that several filmmakers were considered before.
I think Robert Siodmak was considered, and George Stevens was considered. But can you imagine what a different movie this would have been with John Wayne as in the Dana Winter role?
Yeah.
John Wayne, Claire Trevor, and Thomas Mitchell, right?
Did the director work with Dana Andrews in any other of his films?
Yeah, he made quite a few. Was Dana Andrews in Out of the Past, or no? Jacques Tourneur worked at one time or another with everybody, with William Holden, Joel McCrea, Robert Mitchum. He was a journeyman director, made a lot of movies with the Hollywood stars of the 40s and the 50s.
Another small question. You said it was Hoagie Carmichael who was the fellow with the mandolin and the mule.
Yeah.
He also wrote the music. for
Yes.
the film.
Yes.
Yeah.
Did he write the music for any other films and also appear in them?
I think he wrote the music for To Have and To Have Not. Yeah, he was a well-known writer and lyricist of his time.
Was he
Yeah.
in the films as well?
Right. Yeah, that's right.
I think he was also in The Best Years of Our Lives.
Yeah, Dana Andrews was. So, does everybody remember Andy Devine from our gang? Us pals stick together like Scotch tape. Right.
Young in this film.
Yeah, yeah, yeah,
He's got his kids in the film too.
yeah.
I saw Andy Devine in Showboat at a regional theater in Maryland. I was a Girl Scout.
Right.
And I went out of the audience and I stood and waited and asked him for his autograph. He was waiting for his cue.
Right.
And I was asking him for his autograph.
Right.
And he said, "Little girl, come back after the show and I'll gladly give you an autograph, but I don't want to miss my cue." And then I slunk back into
What
the
was
audience.
his tagline was "Pluck your magic twanger, Froggy"? Wasn't that?
I have one more.
Okay.
Sure.
Was Lloyd Bridges at the very beginning of his career? He had
Yes.
a lot of charisma.
Yeah,
and,
yeah.
really,
He was a stud. He played a lot of bad guys early on, but until what was his role on television? Sea Hunt, right? So he was the good guy on Sea Hunt. But what was that Cy Enfield movie where he's the gangs catch me if you? Yeah, yeah. But mostly playing bad guys until he crossed over into television.
charismatic in
Yeah,
that part. Just-
right.
Well, thank you for coming. Thank you so much, Bob, for